So as usual, our program is sponsored by the Eisenhower Foundation and the Union Pacific Foundation. All of our programs and exhibits are made possible only through our partnership with the Eisenhower Foundation and, of course, your generous sponsorship. If you'd like to learn more about partnering, becoming a friend of the foundation, planned giving, or support in any way, the Eisenhower Foundation would love to talk to you. Meredith is here, as usual. Or you can visit eisenhowerfoundation.net for more information. So, our program today. Our guest speaker today is Greg Fontenot, Colonel Greg Fontenot. He's a retired colonel in the United States Army. Thank you, Colonel Fontenot, for your service. And he is currently a consultant on threat emulation for Army experimentation and a working historian. He was lead author of On Point, the U.S. Army in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and is the author of The 1st Infantry Division and the U.S. Army Transformed, Road to Victory in Desert Storm, 1970 to 1991, which is a winner of the 2017 Army Historical Foundation Award for Unit History. He currently lives in Lansing, Kansas, but I found out that his family is from Louisiana, so there you go. There's 2 of us in the room now. And as a reminder, at the end of the program, he will be kind enough to have a book signing, and the books are available in the gift shop for your purchase. So please help me welcome Colonel Fontenot. I was just teasing you. Pam's always available for help.
We're going to do this. Let's do that. I guess that would help. Oh, there's a jar head in the audience. Which one goes up? All right. Thank you very much. Sorry for getting in the middle of a conversation. My high school classmate and oldest friend, Bill Powers, is here. Bill probably would have been an Army officer of some renown, maybe a 4-star, except he had college algebra Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7:30. So instead, he became a combat wounded Marine. I mean, it's kind of, QED, that's how it went down. I was thinking about that today, Bill, on the way up here, going to pick you up at MCI, the old airport. When he came home from Marine Recruit Depot, San Diego, he was cute as a button and naive as hell, which we all are the first time you go in the Army. You have no idea, or the Marine Corps, you have no idea what's going to happen to you. I went through what amounted to basic training for ROTC cadets at Fort Riley, and I entered the door at one end with a t-shirt and blue jeans. I came out the door at the other end wearing a uniform and carrying 2 duffel bags. And, middle-aged ladies, measured you for your clothes while you were in your underwear, which nobody'd see me in my underwear except my mom and my roommates until that time. The Army's not real big on worrying about your dignity. Hey, there's Red, Carol, Bill's closest relation. I also have the Dunbar family, actually not the Dunbar family, my wife's cousin, who's now my cousin by marriage from Wichita, Kansas. I'm really glad to see them. Brett Weeks, I served with in the 1st Infantry Division. Where are you, Brett? And my 2 old buddies, Winfried Wolfgang, Preston Butler, and ask Wendy why he's called, I know you don't go by Wendy anymore, he goes by Win, was the son of a German girl who married an American soldier, which there was a lot of that going around at the end of World War II. Bill's mother was Estonian, and she married a soldier. He was in the 71st Division when they got married, right? So there's a lot of that going around too. Herr Christal, Oberst Christal, who I served with in the 1st Infantry Division, was eventually commanded the DISCOM and was assistant division commander for support rather. I came home from Germany in 1964 in January, and I fell in love with Kansas. So it's not too surprising that I went to Kansas State University and married a girl from Wichita. I met her 50 years ago in the summer, this last summer. Proposed to her, I met her in August, proposed to her 3 weeks later. She did not agree to marry me at that point. Yeah, laugh if you like, it wasn't all that funny to me. But I persisted, and we have been married 50 years in August. And as my brother says, I'm getting really good at wife school. I am a work in progress, but someday I hope to meet her expectations. So I wonder if there's someone else. Now, how many of you had relatives who served in World War II? You see, that's great. And if there's something you want to know, I talked to one of the archivist folks, and they have a program that'll help you figure out your relative's story if you don't know it. And I think it's a tragedy if you don't, because as long as we remember people, they're not gone. Parenthetically, 29 years ago today, I was leading a U.S. tank task force. Mike and Wynn were in the field with us, and we fought the largest tank battle ever fought in the history of the United States. I was in D.C. this weekend to remember the 2 killed and 4 wounded I had, and the 111 killed and 286 wounded we had in the 7th Corps. Even a short war, you can learn a lot. How many people have been shot at in their life? Bill, raise your hand. You've been shot at. Shot at and missed? Anybody get shot at and hit? You got shot at and hit? Yeah, where at?
Brooklyn.
There you go. Well, Brooklyn could be a war zone. You remember cities are armed to the teeth. And some of the folks aren't the good guys. But what did you learn after being shot at once in Brooklyn? Did you learn everything you needed to know by getting shot at?
I learned how to run real fast.
There you go. So when you get shot at, anything after that first round is postdoctoral study. You don't need any practice to get shot at. Bill also got blown up. You don't have to do that more than once either. So we're going to talk about what's it like to get shot at in Belgium as opposed to Brooklyn, albeit Belgium's probably safer than Brooklyn is today. And I also want to get you some sense of the institution of the U.S. Army in World War II and why things happened the way that they did. I've had some great opportunities here this year after writing the book and having it published in November. I was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in St. Paul to be precise, in December. 7 degrees outside, blowing snow, and more than 300 people came and stood in the back of the room because they couldn't get all seats. So look at how many of us there are here today. This time in 1945, the Battle of the Bulge had effectively ended at the end of January. Most people that write histories about it say, well, it was over in, when Bastogne got relieved or when the link-up occurred. But if you're in the 7th Armored Division, you were fighting through to 30 January before it was truly over, and then you transitioned immediately into the Battle for the Ruhr, R-H-U-R, as opposed to the R-O-E-R, Ruhr River. There are 2 of them right there together. So the fighting wasn't over, and a lot of dying had to go on from the end of February on. So it's important to put these things in perspective. That photograph was taken in January of one of the tank battalions heading back south to retake the town. I put some World War II maps on one table. This map shows the route back to Vith using World War II map technology. And if you just pass that around, I'll pick them up at the end of this. And there's 2 sides to that. You can see the notes because I was trying to write from the World War II maps using Google Earth at the same time because the maps from World War II aren't very good. They aren't very accurate. Google Earth is actually pretty good because you can kind of zoom in and you can see for yourself what the terrain is like. And I want to talk about the terrain a little bit. So why should we even bother to talk about this? It has the power to explain the nature of the Army in the same way that Gettysburg did. We lost 18,000 in the first 2 days at Gettysburg on both sides. We lost 80,000 in this fight. The scale of the battle was huge. 29 U.S. divisions, 29 German divisions. Each of those divisions was between 10 and 11,000. So you do the math, more than 250,000 on each side. It's the only really big tank fight, tank and infantry fight to be precise, that occurred in the West. And the reason for that is simple. I'm going to show you the terrain here in a minute. You'll see why you can't have big tank fights in the West. In the East, where there were miles and miles of miles and miles, you could have 800, 900, 1,000 tanks in a fight at one time. The Desert Storm fight I just talked about had 1,800 tanks on one side, 1,600 on the other. More tanks than fought in one day than ever fought in Kursk, which was the biggest tank battle, and that was fought in the East. Strategic choices made by the institutions matter long after they were made. The M1 tank is the last new tank we got, and it was imagined in the 70s and fielded in 1980, and we still have it. And it's been upgraded over time and refitted, but choosing that tank lasted long after the decision was made. And we made a very bad choice with the Sherman tank, and it lasted for a long time. Both sides called the Sherman tank Ronson or Zippo. And for those of you that have never smoked, those are lighters. If you hit an M4 Sherman tank, it immediately caught fire, burned the crew. It was pretty ugly to be in a Sherman tank. And old dead Carl refers to Carl von Clausewitz, whose wife, Mrs. Carl von Clausewitz, actually wrote on war. Carl had a set of notes. When Carl died of cholera in about 1815, there was no pension benefit in the Prussian army, so she took his notes, put it together. But the theory of war that Carl wrote, Vom Krieg, on war, is valid today. And if you happen to read this book, you'll see that his analysis still applies today. There's a section in his book called Critical Analysis, which every human in the world ought to read, because it lays out how analysis works and the benefit of studying a problem if the facts are equivocal. That is, we don't know for sure. And if you think there are unequivocal facts out there on the planet, there are some. Sunrise will come at a certain time most days, and sometime it will not come. But at least for now, sunrise, you can predict the time. Those are unequivocal facts. If you're dealing with a fight, you're talking about eyewitnesses. The worst thing in the world for accounting for what happened is eyewitnesses. Bill's been in a gunfight. Some of these other guys have been in gunfights. I've been in a gunfight. You don't know what happened, because all you know is what you saw. When you're in extremis, you focus very narrowly on the problem before you, not on, what the nature of the universe is. And your mind is compartmentalized. One part of your mind is there, present, doing the fight. There's another part of your mind going, oh my God, we have got to get out of here. Maybe if I turn and run now, no one will see. And there's a third part of your mind that's kind of dispassionately looking at it. Bill, does this sound familiar to you? It's schizophrenic. In the all-night tank fight I described, I kept having this vision of Salvador Dali's surreal painting of the watches melting off the wall, thinking, will this night ever end? And of course, when you're in a gunfight, it's never going to end. It lasts forever. So talking about those things in that context matters. Okay, purpose and themes. I'll let you read those. I only want to highlight the last bullet. Leadership top down, and innovation and initiative bottom up, and the ability to manage those things. If you're living outside and there's a foot of snow on the ground and it's several degrees below zero, and the Germans open up with 1,800 artillery pieces along an 80-mile front, you're going to be impressed. And the life of a soldier in those conditions the right word is dystopian, which is geek speak for miserable. If you've ever been in a tank at night below freezing weather, or in Fort Riley, Kansas in 1973, we had a week where the temperature never rose above 10 degrees, I thought I would die. And some people did. We actually had a guy freeze to death that week. Somebody I was talking to who had a relative that flew bombers in World War II, you get to 25,000 feet the bomber's not sealed. You can look out the window. You can stand up in the hatch and look to the rear. I've done it. It's very cold, many degrees below zero. Many of those people died, or they had frostbite. So the weather matters. Last but not least, Hasso von Manteuffel, in a documentary done in 1964, which you can find on C-SPAN or YouTube, 2 parts called The Battle of St. Vith. If you haven't seen it, it's worth taking the time to do. C-SPAN or YouTube, either way, you can find it. Hasso von Manteuffel was this tiny little guy, about that tall, German cavalry officer, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army. When Omar Bradley met him for the first time, he said, how could so small a man give us so hard a time? Hasso von Manteuffel is the guy that said, the kleine Leute do the fighting. The generals do the planning, they do the resource analysis, but the small people, the junior leaders, the NCOs and privates, they're the guys that carry the load. So here's the context. In November of 1943, in about the same week, the Allies at Cairo and Tehran decided on the strategy for 44-45, and Adolf Hitler decided on his strategy for 44-45. And he wrote something called Führerbefehl, Führer's Order, Leader's Order 51. Just put it on the internet, it'll come up, you can read it for yourself. He decided to shift the main effort from the east to the west, for the perfectly logical reason he had hundreds of miles between the Russians and Germany in the east and 300 miles between the Rhine and the Channel. So he wanted to go to the west, and he thought he could promote a decisive battle, a Clausewitzian concept, actually a German concept. Clausewitz didn't really buy that. But he thought he could fight a decisive battle that would divide the Allies, sue for peace in the west, turn his attention to the east, where he perceived the existential threat was. Adolf Hitler, who was clueless about what other people thought, presumed that the Americans and the British would logically want to fight the communists with them. We didn't feel that way, and so he was very disappointed in May of 1945. The December surprise. I'll let you read the conclusion. I'm writing an article right now for publication in a magazine that talks about how we got surprised. And I want to say something to you that I think is important to understand the context today. In 1944 and 45, we had every means of intelligence collection that we have today, except for satellite imagery. Only thing we didn't have. We had overhead imagery from bombers, reconnaissance airplanes, SIGINT, COMINT, ELINT, HUMINT, all those INTs that you hear about, and we still got it wrong. And why did we get it wrong? Let me tell you, it's very easy. Americans presume that everybody across the planet thinks like we do. Everybody wants what we want. Everybody sees things rationally from our perspective. The United States Army has been kind enough to send me to 60 different countries. I last served overseas in Afghanistan in 2011. At age 62, I decided it was time to get out of that business because I couldn't carry a weapon, and that didn't deter people from shooting in my direction. Not at me personally. It wasn't personal, it was professional. They were shooting at the base camp, not at me. And I thought about this and I said, you know, I've had enough, and I got out of it. But when you think about it, in Afghanistan, they don't think the way we do. In Iraq, they don't think the way we do. And for that matter, in California, they don't think the way some of us do. So when you think about the idea that we all think the same, you really understand how intelligence failure happens. It happens, and I did research for the First Division book using Saddam Hussein's papers. Give you an idea how badly we misunderstood each other. Tariq Aziz at one point in the weeks leading to the war said that he thought maybe the Americans were angry and threatening to go to war with Saddam because Saddam had supported Puerto Rican independence. Now, I saw that head jerk. It's kind of amazing. That's Linda, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, I know her. She's Bill's sister. So if you think about it, even Saddam Hussein thought that was a reach. And Saddam Hussein was a Tikriti Arab who'd never really been anywhere in his life. And his entire worldview was based on a megalomaniacal Arab cultural view of the world, which is tribal, and all of that it leads to. Meanwhile, we think they're the same as us. Turns out that was a mistake. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on contextual things and not on fighting, but if you want to know about the fighting, read the book. I want to talk to you about what I think is important about this story, most important about this story. I think it's all important, is how did we do what we did? How did we plan to do what we did? And why were things the way they were? And what decisions did people make? That's the story of the 7th Armored Division. Someone asked me about the 7th Tank Destroyers. The thing that's confusing about armies is you run out of numbers pretty quick. And so you got 7th Infantry, 7th Regiment, 7th Tank Destroyer, 7th Infantry Division, 7th Armored Group. I went to war with the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Infantry Division, the 1st UK Armored Division. There was 3 1st Divisions right there. Then in 2003, we added to that the 1st Marine Division, the 1st Cavalry Division. So everybody was 1st something or other. The Army does that to make sure that nobody understands what we do. So this is a sketch, came out of a 1947 Military Review article written by Charles B. McDonald. And if you've not read his books, read them. He's a very good writer. He's opinionated like all of us, and he has his own agendas like all of us do. If you want to know truth, you got to study philosophy. If you want to read history, you have to deal with opinions. North of and you see those 3 places, Hurtgen, Ardennes, and the Eifel. Schnee Eifel, it literally means snow plateau. That tells you something about the weather. 106th Infantry Division soldier said he didn't know for sure what Schnee Eifel meant, but he thought it had something to do with a hell of a lot of snow, which is exactly what they had there. The Ardennes is a thick, gloomy place. It's where Maleficent would live if she got a choice. It's Hansel and Gretel scary, and that's in the summertime. In the winter, it's really bleak and grim. It's beautiful, but grim and cold. My wife and I spent 6 years in Europe, or 5.5 years in Europe. When I went to Bosnia for a year, she was there alone. when I came home. She said, you know, I know why Germans start world wars periodically. So why is that, Dana? She said, just get the hell out of Germany. Because Germany's cold, gray, and windy, and misty. And when they have a beautiful day, Germans die of heat stroke. Most of the time, it's like living in the northwest of the United States, the Pacific rainforest, rainy, gloomy, and kind of cold. And that's why I don't sleep outside anymore, because I did that already. So if you look at the battle space from Aachen, which is the old Aix-la-Chapelle, the Holy Roman Empire's capital city, and it extends down roughly to the Trier, which is just to the east of the thing that says Luxembourg, which is the city of Luxembourg City. This is the Schnee Eifel, or rather the Ardennes. That's a tank, M4 Stuart tank from the 87th Reconnaissance Cavalry Squadron, mechanized 7th Armored Division, and you can see what it's like. How would you like to sleep there some night? How about an air burst in those trees, where it blows the tops off the trees, generates splinters, and comes down and kills people? Like if you've seen the HBO Band of Brothers book or movie, you saw a lot of that. You can tell snow's deep there, and the trees are really close together. Not great tank country. I tell people, all country is tank country. Some tank country is better than other tank country. This is not one of the better places. This is a picture of a 1935 postcard where you can see an open space. We're standing or sitting on the hill looking towards the Prumerberg, which was the defensive position of the 7th Armored Division when they first came in. So you're putting tanks up there, trying to find a place to get in there, and you want to be on the edge of the tree line so the Germans don't see you because their tanks are better than our tanks, and so you want to hide from them to the extent that you can. This is a sketch. It says, Wegskizze Teil 1, Panzerverbände. Herr Oberstleutnant Butter, would you like to translate that for us? Do you still speak German? Das ist ein Nein? Nein? Dankeschön. So what that is, it's a way sketch, page 1. It's a route sketch. And then there are a bunch of things down there, but if you see these places where it's thick, and if we didn't have the light so bright, you would see a bunch of red marks. That means tanks don't go there. Those are the main routes of the 6th Panzer Army, the main effort of the German counteroffensive. They're going to go through tough routes. Just so you know where you can find this thing, put your hands on it yourself, touch it, sniff it, all those kind of things geeks like, it's in the National Archives and Records Administration across the street in the Eisenhower Library. And if you've never, and I don't want to get in trouble with anybody here, but I am, they serially number researchers. I was researcher number 144 in the spring of 1970, thanks to Stephen Ambrose. And he opened a world for me that I never realized existed. And so I like nothing better than being in an archive and getting to read stuff and touch things, which eventually they won't let you do, because these things are 75 years old now. It was captured on the second day of the fight, and it gave up part of the plan. And if you don't take advantage of the National Archives experience here, you're just wrong or mistaken. The other thing I want to say about this is German place names tell you everything you want to know about them. If it ends with a Feld, what do you think it means? Farmer's field. So there's a place where there's some opening. If it's a Bach, Harrisbach, Heppenbach, that means there's a stream there. It's a town and a stream. A Bach is a stream or creek. If it says Roth or Rhoda, there's some places like that, then it's a clearing in the forest. If it has a Scheid on the end, and there's a couple of them up there, Mutterscheid, that means it's a Scheid is a ravine, a valley, a gully. German place names describe exactly what's there. They do in the United States too. One of my favorite names, and please plug your ears up if you're offended easily, Maggie's Nipples, Montana. I mean, I just can imagine what that place might look like. But place names, especially in Germany, Bill, tell me if I go too far. Stop me from losing control. Let's drive on before I say something I'll regret. Concepts and conditions. That's how the U.S. Army proposed to fight. Now, when you look at that, there were 89 divisions in the United States Army. The original plan was 200. And we would have 200 divisions, and the infantry division would be about 14,000. The armored divisions were going to be about 12,000. So 200 times 14 is about a big number. I didn't go to college algebra at 7:30, which is why I didn't go to the Marine Corps, but I didn't do any better than Bill did. So when you get to this, it's a lot of people. We found we couldn't man 200 divisions for the simple reason that priority 1 was to strike back. What's the best way to strike back at the Germans if you can't put divisions ashore? Air Force. So the Army leadership, General Marshall in particular, manned the Air Force first and foremost. The other thing you need to know is we had a Europe first strategy. But guess, I won't ask you to guess. As late as the end of December 1943, there were more U.S. Army divisions in the Pacific than there were in Europe. Let me say that again. As late as 1943, there were more divisions in the Pacific than there were in Europe. So we couldn't man all our divisions, and we couldn't man all our divisions because we were manning the Air Force first. We were literally the arsenal of democracy. We're building stuff for the Russians, the Brits, everybody. And we didn't want to empty the entries. Rosie the Riveter filled in, but couldn't do it all. So you had to keep people on the strength to do that. As a consequence of that, and we're fighting two-front war. We're fighting in Europe and the Pacific. Who else fought a two-front war? Germany fought a two-front war, and the United Kingdom. So by the end of 1944, we're running out of troops, and so are everybody else. So we went from 200 divisions to a planned 120, then to a planned 100, and then we took what we called the 90-division gamble. And we couldn't man all of those. Well, what were the consequences of that? You couldn't rotate divisions out of the sector. You couldn't rest divisions, you couldn't retrain them, you couldn't reconstitute them in a safe place. That meant you had to sustain operations and maintain combat readiness without rest. The 1st Infantry Division landed, and I know this because that's my next book. I'm a 1st Division groupie, as you might guess. The 1st Infantry Division landed at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. On the 8th of May, 1945, they had suffered 206% casualties, or 205-point-something% casualties. So if you lose more than twice your authorized strength, who's left? And how do you maintain readiness? How do you do training? How do you assimilate replacements? That is a problem we did not solve effectively. We did, however, solve it with individual replacements, which is kind of tough because some of these guys got yanked out of schools and got sent straight into the field without really going through the 12 weeks of infantry training. And if you got handed a rifle in 1945 and you'd been at the University of Chicago a month before, which a guy interviewed this fall went through that, and he got captured in the Bulge. So how you like me so far? I had 3 years at Chicago, and all of a sudden the Army says, okay, you're done, and put him in the field with a rifle platoon. We had, however, absolute air supremacy by December 44. And I say air supremacy because the Germans could mount sorties, but they got swept from the skies pretty quickly, even with the ME-262 and all those kind of things. We had a manpower shortage. There were 22 divisions in the Pacific by the end of the war. How many Marine Corps divisions? Bill? 6. So when you hear, you see the Pacific HBO thing, you think only the Marines fought in the Pacific. No. The Marines carried their share of the load, but the load was too big. So if you look at Peleliu, one of the great Marine battles, they would go ashore, assault-trained, amphibious-trained Marine division, and a non-amphibious-trained Army division would come in and complete the fight. Now, we did have a bunch of amphibious-trained Army divisions, but not enough to do all the islands. So you had 2 amphibious corps commanded by Marine generals. Each of them had an Army division, and both of them's core troops, the combat support, the engineers, the medics, all those guys were Army troops. So the Army's role in World War II in the Pacific is not well understood. German Army. Everybody talks about Blitzkrieg. They didn't do that. What they really did was Bewegungskrieg, and that's a war of movement. That's German terminology. They used Blitzkrieg only after newspaper journalists said it. They said, well, this sounds good. We'll tell everybody that's what we're doing. Well, really what they were doing is operational maneuver, or Bewegungskrieg, war of movement. They had problems too, and we're going to talk about that. They also had 2 armies. They had the Waffen-SS, a lot like our Marine Corps. No, I'm just kidding. The Waffen-SS, which didn't take orders from regular Army officers if they didn't want to. They were political. Come to think of it, that is a lot like the Marine Corps, isn't it, Bill? And then you had the regular Army. I'm kidding, of course. Or if not, Bill will get even. And lastly, there's this myth about Auftragstaktik, that the Germans were going Auftragstaktik, which is mission orders. Yeah, the Germans did that. They never called it that. An Auftrag is a task. So literally, this is task tactics. Do this task. Well, that could be very directive. What they really did was Selbstständigkeit, which is self-reliance of junior officers and junior NCOs. So what they're really into is, hey, when you go out there and do the best you can, kill a bunch of Russians, and you'll have done okay. That's Selbstständigkeit. It's not Auftragtaktik. Myths and facts. We had the best artillery in World War II, bar none. Because in the interwar period of World War II, the United States Army figured out how to centrally direct fires. Up until the 30s in all armies, and in some armies well after that, battery commanders directed fires on targets they could see. Instead, we put a fire direction center, and we could organize fires and direct the fires of multiple howitzers simultaneously. In fact, there were time on target, first round from every gun fired, rounds at the same place at the same time with 19 battalions. So you figure 12 howitzers per battalion, 1912 times 12 is a big number. I didn't do well at college algebra, somebody else needs to figure that out. It's a large number. German infantry had much, much better automatic weapons, as well as tanks, than their American opponents. There were no continuous front lines. This is the 7th Armored Division, very small division, about 10,000. They had 3 tank battalions, the 17th, 31st, and the 40th, and then 3 infantry battalions, that's across rifles over the bathtub-looking thing, the 23rd, the 38th, and the 48th. They had 3 howitzer battalions. All these howitzer battalions included their own airplanes for aerial observation, something we don't do anymore. They do it with drones now when they have them. And they had their own tanks, so the forward observers didn't have a specific vehicle that said, shoot me, I'm a forward observer. And oh, by the way, if you look at the way we did forward observation in the 80s and 90s, they all had a vehicle that said, shoot me, I'm a forward observer. So we were doing some things that made a lot of sense. These were routinely, this 87th was a cavalry squadron. I showed you a picture of one of their tanks. The 814th was a routinely attached tank destroyer outfit. It had 2 different kinds of tank destroyers, the M18 and M36. These killed tanks very effectively. These guys couldn't. So you had to do combined operations using the tank destroyers to fix the Germans. Then you maneuver to the flanks with the American tanks. If you've seen the movie Fury, it's kind of like Memphis Belle. Everything that ever happened to an airplane happened to the Memphis Belle in 1 hour and 20 minutes. Everything that ever happened to a Sherman tank happened to that Fury in 1 hour and 20 minutes. But there's a lot of accuracy in it. Particularly things like if you go to the tank gunnery manual of World War II, and everybody talks about technology today, let me remind you that in 1945, you could find everybody from horse-drawn artillery to jet airplanes to fax machines to nuclear weapons. So when people tell me technology's changing really fast, in 1940, the U.S. Army pulled its howitzers around with horses. Think about that. By the end of the war, we're building jets, and we popped the nuke. And we planned on popping 6 on day 1 of the invasion of Japan. Think about that. Aren't we glad that it stopped at 2? So when you talk about technology, they had plenty of it, and it was changing rapidly. So enough said about that. Let's drive on. 106th Infantry Division, bigger than the 7th Armored Division, 9 infantry battalions, that's these guys, 3 infantry regiments, and they had an extra howitzer battalion. They had a general support 155 howitzer battalion that could range across the front of a division. Let's look at our German friends. 116th Panzer Division, they too had troop problems. They went to only two tank battalions in what had been a 3-battalion regiment. Originally, at the beginning of the war, they were two tank regiments and 1 infantry regiment. By the end of the war, they couldn't man that many tanks. They didn't have enough of them. The Panther tank is a high-velocity 76-millimeter long gun, which meant it was very effective. The Panzerkampfwagen 4 is the predecessor to the Panther. So they had 2 kinds of tanks. Neither of them were Tigers. There were only 3 or 4 Tiger battalions in the Battle of Bulge, because the Tigers there were very few of them. The 60th Panzer, and these guys were important to the story, Panzergrenadier Regiment had half tracks, kind of like our own. These guys were motorized and run around trucks. And they had 3 different kinds of artillery battalions, only one of which was self-propelled. Then they had 1 Aufklärungsbataillon. Aufklärungs literally is make things clear, reconnaissance, so you could see the battlefield. The infantry regiments that they had, or the infantry divisions, 2 battalions per regiment instead of 3, like we had, but pretty effectively led. 3 kinds of artillery, light artillery, medium artillery, and the 150 was heavy artillery. And yes, they had a Fusilier battalion on bicycles. This weapon, the Hetzer anti-tank weapon, made in the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia, by Skoda Works, very good anti-tank weapon, caused a lot of American fatalities. Miracle in the West, just a quick description of, they were soundly beaten in Normandy. We broke through, and then we went into exploitation, expand. Then we pursued them all the way to the Siegfried. They managed to outrun us, well, because they were desperate. and they got into the positions, and then you see the effort made to rebuild. And look at this. There were 1,552 tanks in Army Group B, which is the outfit that's going to fight in the Ardennes. Only had 100 tanks by 7 September 1944. The bad news for them is we culminated, Clausewitzian term, we ran out of gas. Almost historically, offensive operations eventually culminate because you can no longer advance your logistics fast enough to keep up with the attacking troops. And that's what happened to us. And then we were beaten up too, and it took a while to restore it. So this just shows, this is a post-war map done with India ink. I include it because I just think it's pretty. But the scan lost some of the colors. But that's the advance of the Allied forces. And it's important because here's the Ardennes, right? So north of the Ardennes, you have 1st Army, U.S. 9th Army, British 2nd Army, Canadian 1st Army. These two outfits are assigned to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. The U.S. 9th, the U.S. 1st, and the U.S. 3rd Army are part of Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group. The U.S. 7th Army and the French 1st Army are part of, I just did a brain dump on his name, 6th Army Group. Can't remember who commanded that right now. 55 divisions, but no reserves. So if you want to generate combat power to do an offensive operation, what must you do, Staff College graduates? The principle of war, economy of force, which is geek for you got to thin the line. And so that where would you thin the line? Where's the biggest obstacle in the Western Front? The Ardennes. So why would you do it there? Because, you know, the Germans attacked through the Ardennes in 1870, in 1914, in 1944, and I'm thinking if they attack France again, they're going to come through the Ardennes again. It's an obstacle, but nobody expects you to go there, let alone the Gringo High Command. We didn't believe they'd do it, because why? We're thinking they think just like we do, and the rational thing for them to do is to take their last operational reserve, these 28 divisions, which, by the way, we were tracking them. We knew more or less where they were. What we didn't understand is what they proposed to do. If it had been us, we'd have gone into the defense, because that was rational from our perspective. What they hadn't reckoned on is the megalomaniacal Führer, Adolf Hitler, thought he could still win. And oh, by the way, German morale was still high. Hard to believe, but they had good morale as late as the turn of the year 44, 45. They fought like tigers until after the Ruhr River. And after that, on the east, they fought like tigers to surrender to the Americans rather than any idea that they would survive. Plus, they were also defending Germany at this point. And fighting to defend France is different than fighting to defend your hometown. One of the guys I write about in the book is a guy named, just had another brain dump, Klaus Ritter. Klaus was an anti-tank gunner in the 18th Volksgrenadier Division. He came home on leave from the East Front, found out that the line was so close to his hometown. He lived about 8 kilometers, about 5 miles from the line. He said, hey, maybe I can wangle a reassignment. And he did. And when he got wounded shortly after Christmas in 1944, and the counterattack was coming, they said, well, you guys need to walk back to Prüm to where the hospital is. Prüm is 30-odd kilometers away. But he knew home was on the way. So Klaus went home, never showed up, went AWOL, deserted, if you like, and wrote several books after World War II. He was alive in 2015, and he did a harangue for the Green Party. If you buy the book, you're going to love Klaus Ritter. I know I do. I think he's a great, great character. So this is the planned attack. Those are supposed to be red, but bleeds out here. This is Vith, where the 106th Division is. 7th Army Division is right up here. They're getting ready to do a counterattack. The 8th Corps is defending from Bulge all the way down to south of Echternach. The 4th Infantry Division in the south, beat up in Hurtgen Forest. Some of the infantry regiments lost half their strength. Just north of them is the 28th Infantry Regiment. They were beat up even worse than the 4th Division. And just north of them is the brand new 106th Division. They arrive in the line on the 11th of December, and the battle starts on the 16th. And there was one combat command of the brand new, recently arrived 9th Armored Division right there. So this is 80 miles. Each of the divisions had 15 to 20 miles. A World War II division's weapons capability would allow them to cover about 10 miles of frontage. So they accepted risk here in order to create offensive operations that were going to go against the Ruhr River that were going to attack ROER River right there. They were going to attack with 5th U.S. Corps up there. And so you can see the 5th Corps, 8th Corps boundary right there. So that's the situation. The Germans hadn't got the memo that they were supposed to defend, so they attack, and they immediately surround 2 regiments of the 106th Division with the 18th Volks Grenadiers. Really quickly, then the 7th Armored Division gets told, hey, you guys go south. We don't know what's going on down there. It's no big deal. Here are your routes. These are administrative marches. Sadly, the front line is just east of this. When they get the order to go, they start at 4:30 in the morning. Malmedy is crossed by Kampfgruppe Piper, Joachim Piper leading it with 116 tanks. And he crossed Malmedy early in the morning, and he's bringing more of his friends also. So an observation battery, not assigned to the 7th Armored Division, gets to Malmedy. The commander, the local military government commander, American, says, don't go south. Joachim Piper's guys have broken through. He didn't know who they were. Germans have broken through. This guy said, I really need to get south. He tried it. Joachim Piper's guys captured him, massacred him, and the rest of the story is known. 7th Armored Division's moving with soft stuff. 203rd Anti-Aircraft Artillery, the maintenance guys, the Division Artillery Headquarters, the DTAC, not a bunch of fighters there. 2 battalions in the Reserve Command. They turn. They get to Stavlo just when Piper gets there. Another big fight. So instead of getting down there, it's only 30 miles. Instead of getting down there, leaving at 4:30 in the morning, and you're thinking to yourself, by the way, folks, tanks don't go very fast in World War II. If you're thinking they're moving at 20 miles an hour, no, they're not, because they're icy roads, and they're sliding everywhere. It takes them the better part of 24 hours to get there. Part of the reason was Piper and the Germans are crossing their path, but also 8th Corps Corps support units are being told to withdraw. They turn it into the Oklahoma land rush, and they're heading west. Some people thought they weren't going to stop till they got to the channel because they were very upset and concerned and wanted to leave. So on the afternoon of the 17th, when the lead part of 7th Armored Division gets there, this crowd is surrounded. That's the 2 regiments of the 106th. CCB 9th Armored Division is pulled out of 5th Corps and sent down to Winterspelt. They haven't been in a fight yet. The guy that led them is a guy named Bill Hogue, born in Kansas. Maybe it was Missouri, one of our 2 states. He died in Kansas. He was trained as an engineer, stood up Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division. And they said, Bill, you're such a good officer, such a good engineer. Please go build the Alcan Highway. And he did. Then when he got done with the Alcan Highway, he said, Bill, you're such a good engineer. We want you to command the 1st Special Amphibious Engineer Brigade to work with beach obstacles. And he did. They said, Bill, you did such a good job. We're going to give you Combat Command B back. And he did a really great job here, and he took the Remagen Bridge. Retired as a 3-star general, lived in a trailer in eastern Kansas on his son's front lawn, and died at the clinic at Fort Leavenworth, and nobody knows a thing about him. I would love to write a biography, but his son's dead. There are no papers. It's a travesty because Bill Hogue was a great American hero. Anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. This is to make you understand that it was confusing. So the defense is going to be centered around Vith. The 7th Armored Division is arriving 1 unit at a time. The 8th Corps commander told the 106th Division commander on the 16th, tomorrow morning at 7, the 7th Armored Division is going to be here, and they're going to take care of business for you. So the 106th Division commander thinks he can get 180 tanks. He got Bruce C. Clark, his driver, and an aide. And the rest of the division doesn't begin to even show up till late in the day. And all Clark could do, Hogue and Clark, is put troops out in harm's way. Prumerberg is right there, and you see where our friend is. And this is a cavalry task force, 424th Regiment. The 112th gets blown out here, and they're moving northwest to get out of the way. See all these arrows? Those are bad guys moving. And so how do you like this? Does this look like a continuous front line? No, there's no line. What do you see if you're a commander there? You see with the radios, some of us talked about how bad the radios were, or with wire communications. The phone rang in the 112th Regimental Command Post. Guy answers it. The guy says, hey, we're here. It's the Germans. We're about to come finish you off. Because they knew where the phones were, too. This is ambiguity. It's high adventure. It's cold. People are shooting at you. Guys are threatening to kill each other. Get off the road because I got to get to the channel. No, you get off the road because I have to get to Vith. You get those kind of discussions. Bruce Clark had his aide got threatened. A colonel was going to shoot him. Clark showed up and said, if there's going to be any shooting around here, I'm going to do it. And he took charge and started just throwing units into the fray. And you think about that, big blue arrows on maps, that is not how this goes down. If you read about the Vietnam War, you see a blue arrow going someplace. Bill's been in those blue arrows. If you look at the Desert Storm War, you see blue arrows. Bosnia, there's blue arrows. Trust me, there are no blue arrows. You're in a mess the whole time. When I was a young major, I got to sit in the leather chair that belonged to Captain Leighton Smith, commander of the USS America, later retires a 4-star. I sat in that chair drinking coffee out of a china cup, looking at the flight deck, said, golly, I think I made a horrible mistake. Because I had never slept in sheets in the field. And Snuffy had sheets and a leather chair and hot coffee and guys scraping and bowing when they saw him. So I always use that as an example after that. I'd say to my brigade when I'd get them together, say, you know what? Snuffy Smith has 5,000 guys in his freaking carrier. I got 5,000 guys in my brigade. When Snuffy says steer 270, all 5,000 of them go that direction. When commander, 1st Armored Brigade, I'd say, hey, I want everybody to go 270. I was happy if 90% of them went that way. Because we weren't a crew. We were individual entities. We were kleine Leute. And the kleine Leute get lost, they go to sleep, they make mistakes, they step on each other's toes. It's ambiguous, and that's what I want to leave you with. And oh, by the way, the Germans are dealing with that too. Let's look at the units. 1st SS. Oh, by the way, the 501st Tigers come in here too. That's kind of ugly. Grossdeutschland was really turned out to be the Führer Escort Brigade, but they had Grossdeutschland flashes, so we thought that's who that was. The 18th Volksgrenadier with their 3 regiments, the 62nd with their regiments, the 116th Panzer Division, we don't know how many of them, 2nd Panzer Division, 560th Volksgrenadiers. You start to get the picture here, and the guy running the show doesn't see anything. He doesn't have GPS. He doesn't have email. He doesn't have an electronically generated graphic user interface so he can tell his units with a click and a drag what to do. He's doing this, listening with his ears and seeing with his eyes. Bruce Clark at one point is watching German soldiers mastering other hills. And he said, hey, you go over there, shoot those guys. That's the kind of thing that's going on here. And that can't be done without confidence in your soldiers and without trust in the leaders. That's a couple of days later. It's looking even worse. See, every place you see those little hasher marks, that's where some folks were trying to do a fight. These are units out of 3rd Armored Division. Task Force Hogan, all 400 of them got captured. This is the 82nd Airborne coming in behind these guys. You see all the 30 armored vehicles. We saw 30 armored vehicles. Well, whose were they? How many? What kind of armored vehicles? These are the kind of reports these guys were dealing with. Sam Vith is right here. They've been driven out by then. And you look at the way they got out, I'll show you that route, is a tractor trail. Like the tractor you were telling me that backfired, only it wasn't paved. And it was all muddy. Clark got stuck there in a Jeep. It took 3 hours to get him out. That night that they were leaving, a Russian high moved in, and it froze the ground. Otherwise, the 7th Armored Division probably wouldn't have got out. Weather, terrain, matter. Enough of that. So these are the withdrawal routes. 3 routes. These are the units in contact. The last unit across the river was a tank destroyer unit, platoon leader of which was Will Rogers, Jr., a Democratic congressman who quit the Congress to be a tank destroyer platoon leader. That country no longer exists. I would argue to you that today, with the volunteer forces, anesthesiologists' sons, lawyers' sons, kids that went to Yale and Tufts don't join this Army. They don't join your Marine Corps either. But in World War II, everybody went. The guy that I told you was a philosophy major at Chicago, he went. One of my favorite humans is a guy named Staff Sergeant Richard L. McBride, graduated from Yale with honors, enlisted in the infantry as soon as he graduated in 1943, was a 60-millimeter mortar section leader, turned down OCS twice, turned down battlefield commissions twice, because he wanted to be an infantry 60-millimeter mortar section sergeant with the 7th Armored Division. He wrote a memoir called Grinding It Through, and you read these soldiers' memoirs, and you had semi-literate guys like my father and Bill's father. Bill's dad landed at Omaha Beach on the 3rd wave, and you had Yale graduates all in the same unit. That's cohesion, the kind of which, and it's the last politically motivated comment I'll make, that I wish we could get back to, where we didn't argue with each other over our political views, instead thought of ourselves as similar. These are the units they were fighting. This was the Führer Escort Brigade, and this is a quick sketch of a fight that took place at a place called Baraque de Fraiture. And if you look up Baraque de Fraiture, it'll come up, talk about the Battle of Bulge. If you look at it on Google Earth, you can see a US 105 millimeter howitzer. It was defended by a major named Parker. The 589th FA Battalion got overrun in the Schnee Eifel. They came out under orders to escort and provide security for a Corps artillery group. Think about that. 3 howitzers and a handful of guys are going to secure 3 battalions. Well, a general officer commanded them, told them to do that. When they got there, Major Parker said, wow, these crossroads are critical. I think I ought to stay here and do what I can. Let's go back one. If I can make it go back. There you go. Back another. Must not be pointing this in the right place. Okay, and another. Now, if you go look here, this is Monhay. Right down here is Barak de Freitur, the crossroads. 2nd S Panzer Division is heading this way. You got the 560th going that way. You got the 162nd, the 18th this way, and then you have other SS units the 9th SS trying to get in here. So if you lose this crossroads, what happens to everybody east of them? They go into the bag. So he decides to defend that, and they get pushed out finally on the 23rd of December. Went to visit one of the combatants there, a guy named John Schaffner. He was in a foxhole right there at the intersection. And he went in to warm up for a bit, and his buddy with him. Otherwise, they'd have been killed because the 2nd SS drove tanks right over their foxhole. John Schaffner is the president of the 106th Infantry Division Association, one of the finest men you'd ever meet. The 24th of December, the 7th Armored Division had been withdrawn to here. And A Company, 40th Tank Battalion, some tank destroyers were here. They got ordered to withdraw at 2200. 2nd SS Panzer Division was ordered to attack at 2200. It was pitch dark. If you get a Sherman tank, it's got a telescope about that long and a little periscope, about a 3-power telescope, which is like nothing, and about a 5 or 6-power periscope. Now, Tank Gunnery Manual at the time said the way you fire is you look at your non-ballistic sight, which means it can't estimate range, and you do the width of the target is equal to the range over mils. There are 6,400 mils in a circle. Now, you know how well Bill and I did at college algebra. So when we're going to do width is equal to range over mils, okay, the width of a Panther tank is X number of meters, and range must be equal to, I don't even know how to do it. So the guys in Fury didn't know how to do it either, so what did they do instead? Shoot white phosphorus. You shoot a smoke round and adjust. So we had one set of doctrine to do that, and instead the soldiers said, you know, that ain't going to work. I don't do math. I took college algebra Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7:30, so you shoot a smoke round and adjust. And that is how we fought, because the soldiers figured it out, not because the Army told them how to do it. There's the losses. I have used up a lot of time, so I'm going to press on. They lost 110 tanks out of 170 rather. That's a lot of tanks, particularly if you're one of the guys in the tank. And 12 tank destroyers and 2 other pieces of combat equipment. 1,565 people killed in 7 days. Do the math. I can do that part of the math. It's 200 plus every day. I lost 2 killed and 4 wounded, and it broke my heart. These guys were losing 200 a day. Ugly. Oh, let's go back here. A guy named Bill Knowlton took over B Troop 87th Recon. First Sergeant Hoyle Ladd brought them out. 36 of 135 of them survived the fight. So he had 35 guys. Knowlton went AWOL from a hospital to get back to the fight. I interviewed Knowlton. That was a pen pal of his. Knowlton's daughter, Holly, married a guy named Dave Petraeus at West Point. Some of you may have heard of Dave Petraeus. A lot of the photographs in the book are Knowlton's photographs that Holly Petraeus sent to me. This guy, Bill Knowlton, was one hell of a soldier. A hell of a soldier. And he took B Troop back in the fight. They didn't have enough ammunition for him. They had 3 or 4 magazines or clips, 8 to a clip, so 24 rounds. Okay, if we're going to go back to war that way, it's going to be fine. How do you reconstitute a force of combat? So if you look at the number, they got 140 trained tank crewmen on 30 December, 992 replacements the next day, or 2 days later, 2,000 replacements by 8 January, and they focused their training on small unit combined arms training, because that's how you fight in these compartmented ground, tank platoon, engineer platoon, infantry platoon, and they zeroed their tanks, because if you don't zero your tanks, you don't hit targets. Now you guys that are hunters know zeroing is making sure your sights look at the target at a particular range at which you've decided to zero. In those days, they were zeroing tanks at about 700, 800 meters. When I came to the Army, zeroed at 1,200. In the desert, we could shoot at people and kill them at 3,200. I didn't let my guys do that because you really can't see who you're shooting at that far out. But getting that straight, they worked up traction solutions. Ice and snow, the M4 Sherman was designed to go on roads, built purposely to operate on roads. Didn't do very well in snow and ice. This is the route back. I'm just going to show you the route. I'm not going to talk you through that because I've been at it about an hour, and I want you guys to be able to eat your sandwich. That's Vith. You know, being in a town that's being fought over isn't a pretty picture. Aachen, Germany, the imperial capital of the Holy Roman Empire, was described by soldiers of the 1st Division after they took it that it had been reduced to a Roman ruin. That looks kind of like a Roman ruin to me. If you buy the book, I have a picture in there of bombs and a horse artillery of the Germans. You can see the horses going, I want out of here. And, you know, being in Vith was not a good deal. Killed about 80,000 U.S. casualties, killed, wounded, missing, captured, and about 100,000 German casualties. No one knows how many Belgian and German casualties, civilians there were. The best guy is a guy named Schreiber, a Dutch person, and it looks like about 3,300 civilians were killed in the fighting. So the other thing is, you don't want to be in the middle of a war, whether you're a civilian or a soldier. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. You want to have lunch before questions or questions before lunch?
I think we should go ahead and do questions because the lunch is going to take a little bit longer.
Okay, fine. So if you get tired and you don't want to wait for lunch, sayonara, guten Abend, and all that. Questions, anybody? And I will try to answer it.
We're trying to get the microphone.
Here's one old soldier I talked to is limping out of the building. I know how that feels.
I had a neighbor behind me in Wichita. He was from Latvia. Had a pretty good accent. He fought with the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
He hated the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, he just, I hate them Ruskies. And he was a sniper.
I'll tell you a quick war story about Germans and Russians. When I was brigade commander in Germany, we were coming home in '97. I was there 24 months. I was gone 18 of them. And there was this guy who'd fought against the Americans in World War II. His name was Manfred Wagner. And we'd never had a, quote, Keller party. And he said, you know, my predecessor, you got to go to a Keller party. Couldn't do it. Leaving in about 4 days. Manfred says, hey, he saw us. We went by to say goodbye. He said, come on down. We'll have some sparkling German wine, which is pretty good. And he said, I want to show you where the good stuff is. Well, they had walled off the Keller at the end of the war, actually before the end of the war, because they thought the Russians were going to get there. And they didn't break open the secret compartment of the Keller until the end of the Cold War. So we go to this musty room, and he brings out this bottle of 1937 Armagnac. And he said, I want you to have it because I didn't want the Russians to drink it. I will never open that bottle, but it's a great joy to me to look at that thing and remember that the United States Army did a good job. Secondly, when the Cold War was over, we left. I don't think we should have, but we left. A lot of armies don't. Ma'am?
I have the microphone for the next question.
Anybody have a question? I've exhausted them. Okay. Yes, sir, Brett.
Sir, with regard to U.S. Army replacement policy or their philosophy as far as keeping units in the line, I've read a couple accounts where the Army basically, they intentionally did that. They believed they could wage a war of attrition against the Germans, and they, keep the pressure on the Germans, keep our units in contact, fighting, and basically wear the Germans down because we could replace it. We could replace our troops. They couldn't. And
I've never read that, and that's the kind of cynical reasoning I hope our Army never gets into. Yeah. There was a long period of time where leading historians like Russ Weigley and historians that didn't understand the American Army like von Crefeld and others, and pundits like Bill Lynn and Jim Luttwak, who hadn't got a clue, never wore a uniform, never will have a clue, talked about the cynical leadership of the U.S. Army. I can tell you that I can find no evidence. Sir, could you find a toxic leader in World War II? Of course you could. Can you find a toxic leader today? Yes, you can. But I know of no officer, that's not true, I may know one or two officers, that didn't care about their soldiers. And I know Eisenhower thought about it, George Marshall thought about it, Omar Bradley thought about it. These were people that really, they cared about their people. That could be true. I haven't found any evidence of it. The replacement policy was based on how we designed the structure to support replacements. We built an army that was designed to rotate. So we had replacement depots. That doesn't work if you aren't rotating. So the replacement depots were part of the problem. And I've got all the Army Ground Forces studies and after-action reviews on that. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of stuff about, boy, we got to do this better. But there's nothing about, we're going to wear out the Germans. And by the way, we were worn out too by then. Remember, we were out of troops too. We culminated in September. We didn't quit on purpose. We were out of Schlitz, literally in some cases, but out of fuel, out of ammunition. We had real shortages because we didn't expect to be to the Siegfried until about a year after the invasion. So when you beat the timetable by about 6 months, you've used up a lot of gear. I mean, rubber on the roads, we lost lots and lots of stuff. Look at the Red Ball Express. You know, the Red Ball Express, and the amount of fuel used was, for the time, a huge amount. Any other questions?
Follow up.
Follow up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just to follow up on that. I did read also that, you know, a lot of the divisions, 1st Infantry, you know, the airborne divisions, the reliables, you know, the ones that were combat veterans, you know, they were tended to be, you know, almost like our SS. They were the fire brigade, you know, and they, you know, if you look at the casualty rates of some of those divisions versus, you know, other divisions that were less reliable or less experienced, you know, from what I've read, there was a tendency to keep them in the line because they were so reliable.
There
and they were
is truth to that.
Yeah.
Bradley explicitly talked about it. He didn't want to have to use 1st Infantry Division. 1st Infantry Division made 3 assault landings. Algeria, Sicily, where they almost got overrun at the beach by the Hermann Göring Panzer Grenadier Division tanks, and Omaha Beach. Now, if you've never been to Omaha Beach, the only way you can understand how difficult it was is go stand on that beach at low tide and see how far these guys had. And then the tide rose. It's hard as woodpecker lips to get ashore. But Bradley used them because they knew what they were doing. So yeah, there's some truth to that. Yes, ma'am. Any more questions, anyone? Over there, yeah. What am I doing? I can't run this, I'm up here.
Actually, this is not a question. This is just my testimonial expression. 2008, my husband and I, we spent our Christmas at the...
I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you speak closer to the mic?
Oh, can you hear me better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
2008 is where I quit hearing you.
All right, 2008, my husband and I, we spent Christmas at the St. Vith.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we chose the St. Vith to spend Christmas, because like you expressed in your presentation, 1944, December 17th, this innocent people in the St. Vith, they didn't know what is coming for their Christmas. Everybody ready for this exhilarating Christmas spirit. Then boom, that whole town got completely destroyed.
Yep.
Then they rebuilt the town within 10 years.
They did.
Yeah, so when we visited the town in 2008, what we felt was that uncompromised, that resilience, the morale,
Yes.
and the gratitude towards the Americans. They really filled our hearts, my husband's and my hearts, with one of the best meaningful Christmas spirit in the town. So when we read, you are coming to Eisenhower to present to St. Vith, we are very excited.
I'm glad you came. And the interesting thing about St. Vith is that it was German, given over to Belgium as part of the Treaty of Versailles. So when Klaus Ritter got there, he spoke the same dialect as the people in St. Vith. You go a little bit further west to Ville-Somme, and then everything is spoken in French, and you can buy jambon d'Ardennais, which is a leg of ham that's delicious. These towns, the Europeans, for those of you who don't know, everybody talks about the French aren't good allies. That's not true. If you go to Normandy, and I did this summer, September, there were American flags flying well inland. And there are no French flags because that's not a French custom. It's an American custom. They fly it out of respect 75 years later. And you know what? They know the history of that. I don't think our kids do. I'm tutoring an AP student. The textbooks are okay. They're slightly slanted left, but they're good textbooks. You can learn the story of America, but we don't spend a lot of time teaching it. And not everything that happened in America was bad. And our performance in World War II was fantastic. But don't forget the Russians lost 20 million. Ma'am, are there any more questions, anyone?
Another question? Oh, I'm sorry.
This is kind of after all of this went on. I've been reading some stuff, and somewhere it said that when the American troops went into Germany, we were told not to smile at Germans, not to fraternize, not to have any contact with the people. And the Americans...
I don't know about that, but Win Butler's dad smiled at one German girl.
Yeah, well, that's what they said. The one guy that wrote a reply said, well, unlike the French, the German ladies shave their legs. So,
Well, not when I first got there. But look, what you got to remember is that we had a common culture with the Europeans. If you look at the fighting in the Pacific, there was no common culture. It was even more brutal. But don't think for a minute American soldiers didn't do bad things. They did. You get in a fight with the Waffen-SS, there was a no-quarter rule in a lot of units. If you're fighting the Waffen-SS, you can't say Kamerad, and it's okay. Not with those guys. And once the troops got to places like not Majdanka, that's in Poland, Dachau, a couple of others in Germany, I can't remember things right now because I'm excited, I'm talking too fast. There were some hard feelings about that. But the Germans very quickly, because they're resilient too, accommodated themselves to better the gringos than the USSR. And I think that's still true today. I served in Germany a lot of my life. My dad, I went over there with my dad. I know Win did too. The Germans were great friends and great allies to the American soldiers. And if you go through France and Belgium today, and certain parts of Italy, the Americans are still heroes. And there are incredible, beautiful cemeteries. One of the reasons I'm such a geek about this, I saw my first American cemetery when I was 3 years old at Arlington. I don't remember a thing about it. But when we went to France from there, I went to Saint-Mihiel. Never forgot it. And I've been to Verdun, Luxembourg City National Cemetery, at the Punch Bowl. If there's an American cemetery nearby, I want to go because, you know, one of those days I'm going to be in the American cemetery in Leavenworth, Kansas, and I feel at home and comfortable with those guys. So the American soldier did take their values with them. We tended not to abuse civilians. Some of us did. And we tended not to rape, pillage, and loot. Some of us did that too. Anybody else?
I had a question in this section, and I missed.
Yeah, this gentleman up here.
I saw the hand.
Regarding American the use of horses during World War II, can you typify the differences between German use of horses and American, and what percentage of the total force it was?
Well, the United States Army gave up horses altogether before we got committed in North Africa. The last chief of cavalry, though, John K. Herr, argued that, you know, in 1947, with spurs to glory, we ought to bring the horses back. John K. Herr's idea of mechanization was a truck to carry the horses to the battlefield. He was a little bit out of step. The Germans had lots of horses because they weren't mechanized the way we were. They didn't have the industrial base to do it, nor did the Russians. They had lots of horses too. We used donkeys in Italy and in North Africa. In fact, there's this great passage in Truscott's memoirs, Command Decision. The Rear Admiral that runs the amphibious forces complaining to Truscott that the donkeys are pooping on his ship. And Truscott says, okay, Admiral, we'll take the donkeys off. You know, it'll be okay if some of my soldiers die because they don't get ammunition or food. And the guy said, oh, please stop. Let them, you know, and they took the donkeys to Sicily. So we were very mechanized by comparison. Having said that, none of our infantry divisions were mechanized. The way they do it, they would motorize them. 6 quartermaster truck companies mounted up the 1st Infantry Division for Operation Cobra, and they were motorized. Then they stopped, got off the trucks, and they were infantry again. Any more questions?
So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to thank Colonel Fontenot with me. The lunch is here. Please take your time and eat lunch. Colonel Fontenot will be around if you have some more questions or if you have a book to sign. So let's thank you.
Thank you very much.